Welcome to Leaders and Legends, the podcast focused on leadership and clinical trial execution. I'm your host, Patty Leuchten, CEO of Diligent Pharma. In each episode, we'll get to know the individuals who are driving change and influencing the direction of our industry. Whether you're a seasoned executive yourself, an emerging leader, or simply passionate about clinical trials like I am, join us as we discuss our industry's most pressing challenges, the future of clinical trials, and hear insights and advice from the leaders who are moving our industry forward. So Jennifer, welcome. I'm so happy we're finally getting to do this. So thanks for being here.
I've been, Patty, we've been texting back and forth a little bit about this, and so excited and honored and curious.
Oh, well, this is just going to be a chat, a conversation between the two of us. And, I've been having these really interesting discussions with industry leaders and legends. And I usually start with their origin story. So if you're okay with that, I'd like to start there with you. So if you could share a little bit about where you grew up and a little bit about your childhood, I think that would be great.
Yeah, so like non-CV stuff,
non-resume. Exactly.
All right, well, let's see. I would describe kind of where I come from. While I have lived in North Carolina now for more than half of my life, I'm really a Colorado girl. So I was born in Colorado, in Denver, and at some point in time, lived for a brief period of time in California, and then spent many years in Texas before coming to North Carolina. So I identify, bottom line, kind of as a Coloradan, Californian, Texan, and now North Carolinian. But, just I guess, kind of where I, really come from, my mom and dad are, I'm very grateful that I still have both my mom and dad. And my entire life, my parents have and continue to be hugely influential. So my dad was the dad that got married at a very early age, started a family at a very early age, very self-made, worked for General Motors. He worked for the same company his entire career. He kept his head down and he worked hard, and he worked in General Motors for all those years and was, the very responsible, focus-driven, kind of always thinking about, what retirement was going to look like in terms of stability. Mm-hmm. My mother, on the other hand, was kind of the wanderer, a little bit of the wanderer, hugely entrepreneurial, always like having a little bit of a side hustle. So, growing up in Denver as a little girl, I had, my dad who was working, not even 9 to 5, probably more like 7 to 7, and very focused, in General Motors. And then I had this mother who would reinvent herself constantly, whether that was fireworks stands, Christmas tree lots,
Wow.
Retail, interior design. So she's just always had, I think, this kind of, eye towards reinvention. And so, I think that is a lot of where I kind of have been defined. There's this part of me that is, very focused, and have been in my own career now, been very focused in kind of one sector, but I still feel like I carry a lot of my mom in me.
Oh, 100%. When you were talking, I was thinking, yes, you are equal parts. Your mom, your dad, with your relentless pursuit of, driving change, and your entrepreneurial spirit. That's very interesting. I'm curious to know, there's many things I know about you because we've known each other for a long time, and we've had the opportunity to have dinners together and hang out. But you may have told me, but I can't remember. What was your very first job? Like, not necessarily in clinical trials, but when did you actually start working, and what did you do?
Yeah, I've worked since I was 13 years old. I've never
Wow.
had a time I have not worked since I was 13. So my very first job was at paper route. And for,
Oh,
those younger generations, people might not even realize that at one time there was such a thing as a job as delivering a newspaper. And
oh, that's true. That might be sort of for the younger
yeah,
younger folks listening.
yeah.
They're like, wow, that's quaint. They actually delivered. And did you do this on a bicycle or were you going door to door?
It depended. Part of my route was on a bicycle and part was on foot. And you know what? I look back on that and it was such a great first experience because, at least in my little town in Lake Jackson, Texas, at this time, when I became a newspaper girl, delivery girl, it was kind of your own business. You had to be up at a certain time. You had to make sure that everybody's newspaper got to them. If it didn't, they had your home phone number. So they would be calling and waking up my family, still early in the morning. So there was just a lot of really kind of good discipline that came with that. And then
Mhm.
paid ahead of time. In my case, I had to pay for my newspapers. And then it was my job monthly to collect the money.
Okay,
So it was
interesting.
kind of like starting your own little business.
Yes,
Yeah,
wow.
yeah,
It's so kind of a coincidence because at our company meeting this week, we had a guest speaker, entrepreneur, very successful fintech entrepreneur, and he talked about his paper route as his very first job and how he learned about customer service and similar. So just
yeah.
kind of interesting. So, so how did you make the leap into clinical trials then? What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, Patty, we've talked about this before. I think my story is so common in that I fell into research. I went to college. Going into college, I wanted to be a doctor. Coming out of college, that at the time did not feel like that was a realistic option for me. I look back on it now and I tell my kids all sorts of other things that, like that wouldn't have necessarily been true. But at least for me, coming out of college, I felt like, well, that door shut on medical school. So, it was like a friend of a friend connected me to, ultimately it was really an investigator who was doing research as an extension of his practice in Texas. And, it sounded intriguing to me, and what I heard, I didn't understand what a research coordinator, which that was the first job
Mm,
I had. I didn't really understand. I couldn't even really envision what that meant. But what I heard as I was talking to him, and, eventually as he made me the offer and I accepted the offer for this first job coming out of school, what I heard was working with patients, building relationships, working with pharma and pharmaceutical companies. We wouldn't have talked about pharma then, it would have been pharmaceutical companies.
mhm.
And the importance around ethics and integrity around data collection. And all of those things just seem to speak to me. I mean,
Yeah.
little obsessive compulsive, leaning into, being in an environment of where you're working with doctors and patients. So I fell into it. I mean, that's, I guess, kind of the bottom line. I kind of I fell into it. But in a pretty short period of time, I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that I had found my life's work.
Yeah. Wow. And what I'm sort of struck by is that I think we're kind of living parallel lives in a way at the same time. I'm not 100% sure, but I started with my first job in 1987, 1988
Yep.
as a CRA.
Yep.
And a very similar friend in college told me about, her new job as a CRA, and same thing, got into it. And it also became my passion and my life's work. So is that time frame about the
I think
same for you?
we are parallel lives. We are parallel lives. My guess, though, Patty, in your story is what intrigued you was probably a little bit of an element of travel the world, right, as a CRA.
Yes.
and yeah, and it was a really exciting and interesting. I just feel like, I guess every generation, right? You carry your bias about, the advantages that you've
Yeah.
had. But looking back at that time frame, I came into my first job in 1987, very early 1987. But CROs as a sector were just really starting to emerge. And, pharmaceutical companies, it was just as I look back on that and the relationship that, pharmaceutical companies had with CROs, and, there were not gigantic CROs. I mean, it was still a very nascent sector.
Yes.
And I just, even then, even though you were on the CRO side, I was on the site side, that interconnectivity of how we were working together, ultimately,
Hmm.
was just part of what just fascinated me. It's just this
Yes.
ongoing theme. I talk all the time about, for those of us who go back 40 years in this industry, there are universal truths that withstand the test of time. And there was a lot of new at that time, that has now, emerged into a lot of different news. But just that importance of those relationships and the interconnectivity.
100%. Yeah. My first job was with what was ICI Pharma, AstraZeneca. So I was a CRA for 2 years. And when I had this opportunity to interview with Besselar Associates, which became Covance, I did not know what a CRO was. So I had to sort of get my head around what this is, and spent then obviously so many years working for some of the largest CROs, and staying really fascinated by this whole concept of relationships and partnerships, and how critical it is for the success of clinical trial execution that those partnerships go well. But if you think about how the CRO world has not really been around for as long, and especially when we were, doing our work in the late 80s, early 90s, it was early days. Um, so I want to get into Javara because what you've done with Javara is nothing short of heroic. I mean, I think that you're launching that company to essentially revolutionize the way we think about this intersection between clinical research and clinical care, was huge for our industry. And I wonder if you could just talk about the spark that led you to get the company off the ground and what that was like.
I don't, so thank you for all of that, Patty. But gosh, I mean, it's been such a journey. And I think in a lot of ways, for me, in terms of Javara, it's almost like full circle. Because when I came into research, I landed just by happenstance in probably a relatively unique place in terms of kind of site at that time.
Mm.
So going
Yes.
back in the 80s, more research was being still conducted in large academic medical centers. This physician who first hired me, I think, was really revolutionary in that he was a practicing physician. He
Mm.
was a practicing physician. He saw the importance of providing at a community-based level. He saw the importance of having clinical research as an option for his most severe, his most uncontrolled patients, in whatever medical conditions that they had. So in a lot of ways, that's kind of where I started. It was an extension
Mm.
of, now over time, and through that position, and then ultimately, I moved and ultimately joined what became known as PMG Research, and now today known as Excelicare. That model started to evolve to kind of freestanding and, other versions of kind of, site management orientation. But I don't know. I think in some ways for me, that seed was planted from the very beginning that I never saw clinical trial participants just as volunteers. I saw them as empowered healthcare consumers.
Mm,
We had a responsibility to just bring forth, research as an offering. It's interesting, and I mean, I even think back from an ethical, like an IRB standpoint. So many times, some of the earlier fights that I had in a way with ethics review committees and positioning and what we could say to patients, what we could not say to patients, should we even call them patients? In a way, from the very beginning, I just rejected that because I saw that I was an extension of, a healthcare provider's practice. And I think in a way, Javara just kind of, that was the opportunity to kind of go back
yeah.
to that. Understanding the
Yeah.
landscape is far more complex now because it is more of a system orientation. More physicians back in the 80s, if you weren't associated with an academic medical center, you were an independent private practice. That divide was
Right.
pretty great. Today, and I
Hmm.
think from a Javara standpoint, what we've really leaned into from the very beginning was, okay, understanding the landscape of physicians is a little bit different, and the interconnectivity of physicians to kind of larger systems or organizations and the inner workings of how that works. That's what we've really had to nuance.
Yeah. So, yes, it's interesting because it started with a sort of an idea, a strong, a vision that you brought forward, and common sense to you, maybe not common sense to everybody, but you had a conviction around it. But at the same time, the industry is not static, it's changing, it's very dynamic. So, I'm imagining the world now with Javara is very different than when you were CEO of PMG, and you're having to sort of navigate that change. And I want to do just a little bit of time travel and go back to PMG and your role as CEO, because, I'm thinking about your professional trajectory that you were a study coordinator, you were working at sites. Now you're CEO of PMG. Talk about that a little bit and just stepping into that leadership role and what that was like.
Yeah, I don't know, Patty. I never started my career aspiring to be a CEO. I didn't join PMG. I joined PMG in 1989. That wasn't even on my radar. I think my journey to ultimately becoming CEO of that company was just a journey based on kind of, I'm going to say, uh, transformation and growth. So
Hmm.
I just had an opportunity to, I think, be in a position to be a step ahead and kind of step into positions as the need was being established and created. And so when I
I
started
see.
at PMG, it was a single site. And then there was almost more of a community expansion effort. And then that
Hmm.
worked so well. It was like, well, why wouldn't we do that in this other community where we know that there's an interest, right, from physicians? Why would we not kind of take that playbook and continue to replicate that? So, with that expansion, and as we kind of went from single site to more of an enterprise, then yeah, I think I describe it almost more as common sense. Like, why
Mm.
would we keep doing the same thing 5 times? Isn't there an opportunity that we do it one time on behalf of five? That type of
Yes.
concept around, kind of growth and transformation. How are we thinking as technologies were emerging? I mean, Patty, to date us, when you and I started in this business, the big technology was a fax machine.
I
Um,
know. I had to figure
right?
out how to use it, which is when you think about it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So just over that time, I think as kind of growth and the opportunity and change and progress, It was always a matter of kind of, being able to look out ahead and figure out, when there wasn't a marketplace for CTMS, clinical trial management systems. Okay, how are we going to start organizing this data
Right.
beyond a notebook? So, I look back on those 27 years that I was at PMG as, just a tremendous gift. And I can look back and I can point my finger to a lot of moments around development and advancement. But we're amid that same thing right now. Like that it's another
Yes.
universal truth that has not changed.
That's so true. Yes. And we met when I think it was maybe 2013, 2014, when you joined us at one of our consortium summits. Am I getting the year right about? Is that
That's
right?
right.
About 10 years ago. And I think, one of the things that I sort of learned from you over the years is just watching you as a leader in terms of just staying very true to your convictions and to the noble purpose that you were putting forward and your passion around it. But also, you were running a really solid business. And I remember even a conversation around just the investment that you got with PMG. And I learned so much from you because at Avoca, I was sort of going it alone and a little skeptical about getting financial partners because I just wanted to keep my culture. But your influence has really helped me now with Diligent, and we have this common friend in Todd Johnson. Introducing me to Todd and FCA was transformational for us as a company, with FCA as our lead investor. And I just want to talk a little bit about sort of the business dynamics. And it's interesting because I interviewed Michelle Longmire last week, and we talked a little bit about Medable and her getting this amazing funding with Medable. And she said when she came into the industry, she felt a little bit like an outsider. And at first I thought that she was thinking, well, it's hard to go from researcher at Stanford to, running a company, a tech company like Medable. But what she said was she felt like an outsider being a woman entrepreneur in this industry and raising money. And can you talk about your experience with that?
Yeah, so first of all, my experience from an investor standpoint, I just want to be really clear on this, Patty. In all honesty, my kind of foray into the investment world came out of necessity. So I want to be clear on that. It's not that I was necessarily thinking about that, in terms of how investment. It came out of necessity. I had a business partner who tragically, died in a plane crash, and it was
Yes.
very unexpected. And so there were elements around just kind of succession planning and
I
business
see.
planning that all of a sudden, kind of in a moment, was a reality. So I just want to
Yeah.
be clear on that. It wasn't
Okay.
that and had that not happened, who knows,
Mm.
what my journey would have been like. Um, but I'm going to say this. First of all, not all investors are created equal. Um, in my experience, though, what an investor can do, especially for those of us who have been in a sector and have grown up in a sector, or, believe that we have achieved some level of mastery. I think an investor, can bring fresh perspective and can ask sometimes the hard questions that need to be asked. Now, sometimes investors continue to ask, um, maybe, questions that have already been answered. But I think
Hmm.
that fresh perspective is really good especially in this business where we have, regulations, and we just have a lot of legacy. Like, well, this is the way we've always done it. Well, but why is that? Is there a better way, right? How can you think about capital? How can you think about partnerships? So I think kind of in addition to the obvious, the capital and how you think about capital and kind of leveraging that, and buoying you, to growth. I think there's a lot of value in terms of just that investor's perspective, and the different experiences that they have in other sectors that actually could be transferable, as we reimagine, which we all need to continue to reimagine how to do better. I mean, clearly for patients, that is the universal truth that never changes. I mean, we all need to continually feel the warm breath of hot air on the back of our necks around urgency, to get drugs, to get new medical breakthroughs, to patients faster.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, well, I agree with you. For me, my personal experience has been so positive now having financial partners. And I think that, what we appreciate is that our investors, FCA, as well as, our other investors, PJC, Genhen, our private investors, they do appreciate that we're driving a company that's focused on change and a noble purpose that has patients front and center. And there's a respect for that. And that to me was sort of a pleasant surprise, I guess, because I had a preconceived idea about what it would be like to have financial partners. And it's been a great, great, great experience for us. And this is kind of going back to say that that you really helped me with that, not only with introducing me years ago to our mutually good friend now, Todd Johnson, but just, kind of opening my mind to the possibility. I want to get back a little bit with Javara and your role at Javara. And I'm imagining that in such a dynamic organization, the industry's changing very quickly. Just being a leader of a company like Javara could have its challenges. Can you just kind of talk a little bit about one, what is sort of kind of one of the challenging things about being the head of a company like Javara, but then also sort of the flip side of what is like the most gratifying aspect of it as well?
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm going to try to follow your rules and start with the challenging, but I lean into the exciting, wanting to really talk about that. Listen, I think, Patty, it has been very, very difficult. I mean, Javara really launched now less than 7 years ago, coming on 7 years, but we created this new sector. And it is difficult at times when there is still headwinds around, the financial model and, the scalability and, how are you pricing? Because we really are converging healthcare, and there is a lot of complexity. It's not like a buzzword, integrating research with care is not just, 3 additional ticking of boxes. I mean, there's a lot more to it. In our case, we have the privilege and we have the responsibility of protected health information through access to literally millions of patients' lives through their electronic health record. I mean, that everybody wants that. Everybody wants that. But what comes with that is exponentially more involved. So I think just being a first in a way we're not following a playbook. There's no playbook that we're not following. I am very proud of. Now I'm going to pivot. So that's probably honestly and broadly one of the most challenging things. And I could drill down, you and I could talk about, and I'm confident that you and I will do this next time we're together. I could drill down on probably 10 different elements of challenges. Female leader in that environment, investment community, real-time decisions that are being made in the company, amid a lot of uncertainty, market uncertainties, pharma spend uncertainty. But, kind of beyond that, I think what is the most rewarding is just that, from a business standpoint, I had somebody tell me one time that, the extreme market advantages to being a fast follower. And I get that. I get that. But personally, that is not what is rewarding to me. What is incredibly rewarding to me is I do believe that we are learning so much. We are fine-tuning. We are making adjustments. I do think that we are creating a playbook to be used and to be replicated for Javara's purposes and all of our stakeholders, to their benefit, but for many others. And I really believe that. And I certainly have far more conviction around that and the sustainability of this sector today than I did even 7 years ago. What I'm hopeful for, and I want to get back to the investor piece to this, just to kind of, link a couple of things. What I am really hopeful for is across our sector, that the usual list of suspect investors, which there is a very vibrant, very smart, very dynamic life science investor group.
Yes.
I get really excited about investors that are now starting to lean into this, that are almost more on the physician services and healthcare side of the equation, because I do believe that there is a tremendous value opportunity yet to be really captured. And that's a current trend that I'm seeing more and more kind of energy and interest, from those types of groups. And I think that really converging clinical research with healthcare, that's what it's going to take. We need to have a healthier mix of investors that are life science and also on the healthcare side of the equation coming together.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And, what you described as being a trailblazer rather than a fast follower is a difficult place to be in terms of industry acceptance, industry adoption. Personally, I found that it takes a lot of resilience to put something that's new, that makes sense, but that is a different way of working. And how do you cope with that when you're dealing with clients and there's sort of an acknowledgement of what you're doing, but sort of a reticence to do something a little bit different?
Yeah, I think practically speaking, Patty, I probably, spent a lot more energy in the earlier days talking about kind of theoretically. I think, that journey has been more around managing myself to not, to put more energy into just doing it. Let's just do it and let's demonstrate, right?
I like that. Yes.
So, I really have considered so many things in Javara. Most things that we do is a pilot. The first time that we are working with a new healthcare system, the first time we are working with a physician who has never been an investigator, the first time that we are working in a new therapeutic area. And honestly, that is probably one of the biggest changes, because all of that happening now kind of within a 6-year window of time versus within PMG, that was over a 27-year period of time. There's just this kind of massive consolidation. So I think just kind of looking into everything is like a proof point and a challenge. And
Gotcha.
and this is probably a little warped, but in a lot of ways, I mean, I think I thrive a little bit personally on being underestimated. So, there's always
The
a little more
underdog. Yes. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I could see that. I could totally see that. Well, I know we could talk forever. I have two more questions that I want to slip in. One of them I was going to ask you when we were talking about your origin story, your upbringing, but I want to talk about you're a runner and you run marathons and you get on airplanes and run marathons in places like Tokyo. And so how important is running to you in your life on a scale of 1 to 10? Like, is it front and center or is it just what you do to blow off steam?
Yeah, it's a solid 10, but there's not a day that goes by that I don't understand that that 10 tomorrow could go away. It could go away. So I'm super mindful that every single day that I get to, um, you know, wake up early. It's
Yeah.
usually I either wake up at 5:15 if I'm going to start running at 5:30, or I wake up at 5:30 if I'm going to start at 5:45. Every single day just being really thankful, like here's another day I get to go.
Yeah.
But also always being super mindful that, at some point I will reinvent. There will be something else that comes in place of that. But yeah, running actually probably represents the time in my life that I feel is totally mine.
Yeah.
It is totally 100% mine. And this, when you're running a company, when you show up, you have to put the me, part of this aside. So
Hmm.
it feels a little self-indulgent, every day. And I think everybody needs
Mm.
a bit of self-indulgence in their life.
I'm glad I asked you the question because I'm inspired by your answer. And I also used to be a runner and I had to pivot a little bit to do other things. But I used to have, what I call gratitude runs, where it was all about just being so thankful that I can run up this hill, that I'm, healthy, and the what was going through my mind was not the agenda and what conference I had to speak at, but it was really, just looking at the totality of my life and being very, very thankful. And I do that in different ways now, but I can relate to that. I'm going to pick up my headset. Just one second. So my last question is really around the future of clinical trials and just what you see on the horizon over the next, say, 5 to 10 years. What do you see as how will clinical trials evolve?
Well, I mean, listen, I think the evolution of this is so exciting. I'm hearing now from companies. I was in a meeting yesterday and somebody was describing, in this new partnership that we have with a particular pharma company. The discussion was around, we anticipate including 50,000 people in our clinical trials. This is one company, talking 50,000 people in our clinical trials. And we would like to think of the way in which we're going to work together so that you're contributing 35% of those. I mean, so the size and the
Wow.
scale, I think how pharma is thinking. I don't want anybody to be discouraged to enter into clinical research. And, up to this point in time, the barrier to entry is pretty low. We have so many sites, but as a result, we have so few people who go
Yes.
in and are contributing, kind of. So I think the consolidation that's happening is actually a really good thing because I think the consolidation allows for more consistency. And I think there are just so many more efficiencies. And with that consolidation and efficiencies and mass and volume, I mean, investors will talk about scalability, right, in terms of dollars and cents. I think about scalability in terms of, in a future state, what percent of the US population and global population are we able to convert into active clinical trial participants? And I'm so encouraged by this because there are so many different important forces and influencers and companies and funding that's coming into this space. So, I think these statistics, these horrendous statistics, whether you're an oncology patient and, the relatively few people that are even offered a clinical trial, or hey, let's face it, I mean, if you are a woman going through menopause and you can't find the right therapy, that's a burning need. I mean, that affects your quality of life. So that's important too. I think that we're going to see massive transformation in that. I mean, there are large companies, payers that are leaning into this, large health systems. And I think there is a change in mindset from a pharma standpoint. They're entering into strategic partnerships, kind of especially in this site level, where we're not talking about a few hundred patients being attributed to those partnerships, but potentially tens of thousands.
Yes.
And you can start making a difference from a population health standpoint to the greater ecosystem when you're thinking and have an enterprise that is really transforming to be able to adapt to that.
It's a great upbeat way to end this conversation. There were so many things that I wanted to talk about that we didn't get to. So we're going to have part 2 at some point. But thank you so much, Jennifer. You're amazing. Thank you for all the support you've given me personally over the years. And you've been such an inspiration to me and to so many people. So thank you.
Well, Patty, thank you so much. You have inspired me. You were a person that I looked at from afar for so many years. And so those, blink of an eye 10 years ago, life has been better. The sector is most definitely better because of you. And thank you for creating this platform for, me and all the other people to come to share.
Well, it's my pleasure. It's so much fun to talk with you and other leaders, and so it gives me a lot of joy. So thanks again, Jennifer, and we'll see each other soon, I hope.
Absolutely. Thank you, Patty.